to you, and thank you so much for finding time to joining us today. The show is African Touch. We get to bring you the latest trending stories or newsmaking headlines from across the continent of Africa. My name is Miriam Ogoto, and it is a pleasure to have you on board. It is Monday, the 8th of May, 2023. And before we get into the news, I'd like to bring us up to date with the latest headlines from across the continent of Africa and others from outside. And as usual, we shall start with the newspapers from Kenya. The Daily Nation: Ruto reignites fuel tax storm. Finance Bill: President William Ruto's quest to reinstate an unpopular fuel tax that his predecessor Uhuru Kenyatta was forced to shelve revives the political games that stalk petroleum prices and exposes Kenya Kwanza leaders double speak on a matter of public interest, and that has a direct impact on the cost of living. The story is on page 4 and 5 on the Daily Nation. Civil servants threaten to go on strike over housing fund. And school reopened today for second term. The Standard newspaper: civil servants defy order on new taxes. Public service employees say the proposed tax measures will eat up to 52% of their pay, which they claim is overtaxation, and call on MPs to reject the finance bill. But well, the Star newspaper: MCA's pay campaign, 400,000 Kenya shillings new target. And the Business Daily: state paid to retirees falls by 36 billion Kenya shillings amid cash crunch. The People Daily: safety warning as schools reopen. Education CS puts head teachers on notice over quality of food and well-being of students, including reminding them that corporal punishment is outlawed after cases were reported in the first term. At the Taifa Leo, the leading newspaper in Kiswahili here in Kenya: Raila atetea Pastor Ezekiel. That is what we have there. Now let's take a look at some other newspapers from across the continent. From Zimbabwe, the Daily News: we are watching them. ZANU-PF party wants its 2023 candidates anew as polls loom, and school on high alert for cholera. The Newsday from Zimbabwe as well: outcry over school fees hike. And then the Citizen from Tanzania: coal exports rise to a record high. The Daily News, this one is from Egypt, I believe: Syria returns to Arab League after 12-year suspension. And Foreign Minister Shukri visits Chad, South Sudan for talks on Sudanese crisis. Irrigation Minister: Australian Ambassador discuss joint cooperation, incorporating Misr Insurance holding into TSFE could take over 1 year. So those are the local stories there in Egypt. The Daily Trust from Nigeria, I believe: aspirants move against Tinubu's anointed candidate. What attracted me to President-elect, that is Abbas. We were not consulted. Wasi's camp. Endorsement mere speculation. Gaddi. Bitara declares today. North Central spoils for fight. 144 passengers unhurt as Max airplane crash lands in Abuja. Vanguard: we will exploit confusion in APC to produce speaker opposition parties. The News Times, that is from Rwanda. The New Times: UK mining firm keen to exploit lithium in Rwanda. And government has created good environment for Muslims. That is according to Mufti. Rwanda registers record high growth in women-owned businesses. And that's interesting. Daily Monitor, that is from Uganda: flu cough wave sparks COVID fear. That is what we have there. And some newspapers from the UK. The Daily Mail: Pa, we are also proud of you. On an emotional night, William invokes the late Queen in heartfelt tribute to newly crowned father. And coronation special, the Daily Telegraph: Pa, we are also proud of you. I think that's what William said. The Times as well, that is what has been quoted as well. Pa, we are also proud of you. All hail the King and I. Caitlin Moran on what it meant. And Daily Express: we are also proud of you. Granny too. That is what I guess Prince William said there. Britain, that is iNews, Britain more open to idea of political king. Okay, I think that is a conversation that has been raging. And if you were in tune over the weekend, there was the coronation of King Charles III, and all right, the celebrations continue. And the independent power, we are also proud of you. William's touching tribute to newly crowned king. Don't send migrants to a country under shadow of genocide. Ex-army chief's dramatic intervention on Rwanda policy as he warns Home Secretary. Interesting. The Mirror. Granny will be proud. Prince of Wales says late Queen is up there, fondling, keeping an eye on us. The Scotsman, I think this is from Scotland, William tells of pride in King at coronation finale. Okay, let's look at some papers from the US, the Wall Street Journal. Officials probe Texas shooters, possible white supremacy ties. Tech stock slump hits worker wealth. West sees role for Beijing in ending Ukraine conflict. And the USA Today, Proud Boys verdict guilty. Love of horses racing knows no boundaries, no borders. Death of NFL player's child stuck pool safety reminder. The New York Times, China is deleting poverty one video at a time. Irie over Twitter letting images spread online. And a new massacre, but Texas shuns gun constraints. The resolved and resilience return home, and how two men's desperate paths led to a killing on the subway. The Washington Post, racist views eyed in massacre. Most in U.S. back GOP's anti-trans policies. Iran hide arms in AIDS, file says. Risky drivers amass tickets and put D.C. in a tight spot behind Trump's musical tribute. The Guardian, the USA edition, U.S. food pesticides contaminated with toxic forever chemicals testing fines. Okay, sorry about that. So that is what we have on the headlines in some of those newspapers from Africa and others from the UK and a few from the US. Before we get into the news, let me perhaps look at some climatic conditions this morning from some major cities across the continent. From Johannesburg today, the weather is expected to be rainy. Some rain is expected there in Johannesburg with highs of 13 degrees Celsius and lows of 8 degrees Celsius. So it's going to be a cold day there in Johannesburg. And in Nairobi, it is mostly cloudy with highs of 26 degrees Celsius and lows of 16 degrees Celsius. In Accra, the capital city of Ghana, highs of 32 degrees Celsius and lows of 26 degrees Celsius. And it's going to be partly cloudy there in Accra. In Dakar, Senegal, highs of 27 degrees Celsius, lows of 22 degrees Celsius. And it's going to be partly cloudy. And in Abuja, Nigeria, highs of 36 degrees Celsius and lows of 25 degrees Celsius. And it's also going to be partly cloudy there in Abuja. And in Kinshasa, that is the Democratic Republic of Congo, highs of 32 degrees Celsius and lows of 23 degrees Celsius. In Luanda, Angola, highs of 31 degrees Celsius and lows of 26 degrees Celsius. And it's going to be mostly cloudy. And in Khartoum, it is very hot day there. It's been hot, all the heat with the fighting and everything else, with highs of 41 degrees Celsius and lows of 25 degrees Celsius. And it's going to be mostly sunny there in Khartoum. And in Addis Ababa, partly cloudy with highs of 22 degrees Celsius and lows of 12 degrees Celsius. So I think I'll just leave that there for right now, but I want to believe that you were up to date with your weather update there and the headlines from across Africa and from outside. A very good morning to you. 18 minutes past 10 a.m. here in Nairobi. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and watching us from. Let's get into the news, and we start from Sudan. Hundreds of refugees fleeing ongoing violent unrest in Sudan have crossed to the border into Ethiopia. Fighting broke out in Sudan on April the 15th between the army and the paramilitary forces. And so far, at least 700 people have been killed. Most of them are civilians. The situation comes as gun battles and airstrikes on Sunday again flared in Khartoum, Sudan's capital, which has been rocked by 4 weeks of fighting despite the latest ceasefire efforts backed by Saudi Arabia and United States. Multiple truce deals have been declared and quickly violated. Since fighting erupted between army and the paramilitary forces, fierce combat since then has killed at least 700 people, most of them civilians, wounded thousands, and driven a mass of exodus of Sudanese and foreign nationals. In embattled Khartoum, fighter jets have bombed enemy positions as terrified residents stayed barricaded indoors amid dire shortage of water, food, medicines, and other staples. Across the Red Sea in the Saudi city of Jeddah, talks were underway aiming for a ceasefire that could aid the desperate efforts to bring humanitarian aid to the besieged population. The generals leading the warring parties have blamed each other for the violence but have said little about the talks being held in Jeddah since Saturday. Army spokesperson Brigadier General Nabil Abdallah said the talks were on how a truce can be correctly implemented to serve the humanitarian side, while Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who is the head of the Rapid Support Forces, only said on Twitter that he welcomed the technical discussions. Riyadh and Washington have supported the pre-negotiation talks and urged the belligerents to get actively involved. And still staying with Sudan, the Arab League held an emergency meeting in Cairo this weekend, the third of its kind in 3 weeks, to discuss the ongoing military clashes in Sudan. Sudan has been suffering deadly armed clashes between the Sudanese Armed Forces SAF and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces RSF in the capital city of Khartoum and other areas since the April 15th, with two sides accusing each other of initiating the conflict. Shortly after the outbreak of the conflict, the AL held two emergency meetings, that is the Arab League, held two emergency meetings on the April 16th and 30th, respectively, to discuss the situation in Sudan. This weekend, top diplomats in the Arab world gathered in the Egyptian capital once again, trying to see how they can cooperate to help the Sudanese talks succeed so as to ensure Sudan is not dragged into a long armed conflict. The Arab League meeting came after Egyptian Foreign Minister Sami Shukri wrapped up a busy week to discuss the crisis in Egypt's southern neighbor. Shukri spoke to the commanders of the rival Sudanese sides, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan of the SAF and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo of RSF. Shukri also discussed the recent developments with 7 Arab and African foreign ministers, including those of Kenya and Djibouti. So far, the deadly clashes have left over 700 people dead and over 4,000, nearly 5,000 others wounded, according to the Sudanese Health Ministry. Head over to the DRC, and the death from floods and landslides in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo has risen to 203 people who have died as more bodies are recovered, an administrative official said over the weekend. The provincial death toll announced late on Friday by the provincial governor was at least 176 deaths. It was not possible to evaluate the full extent of the human losses and material damage, he told the media. Heavy rainfall in the Kalehe region of South Kivu province on Thursday caused rivers to overflow, causing landslides that engulfed the village of Bushushu and Nyamukubi. The hillside also gave way to Nyamukubi, where the weekly market was held on Thursday. Bakenga, a local leader from that area, added, in all, several villages were submerged, many houses washed away, and fields devastated. 1 rivers in the region burst their banks due to the heavy rains, Congolese doctor, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Denis Mukwege, whose clinic is located in Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu, said on Saturday he had sent a team of surgeons, anesthetists, and technicians to the area to provide the population with emergency medical aid. The disaster came 2 days after floods killed at least 131 people and destroyed thousands of homes in neighboring Rwanda. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Saturday offered his condolences to the victims of the catastrophic floods in Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Very well, and then we head over to Mali, I believe. Mali have been digesting the news. Malians have been digesting the news that there's finally going to be a referendum on whether to update the constitution on June the 18th. It is supposed to move the vast country towards civilian rule after a military junta seized power in 2020. The referendum, in which voters can choose to either accept or reject a draft already contested by political opponents, was due to have taken place in March but was postponed. The draft would considerably strengthen the power of the president. In it, the head of state, rather than the government, determines the policy of the nation, appoints the prime minister and ministers, and has the right to terminate their functions according to the proposal. Government spokesperson Colonel Abdullahi Maiga made the announcement on a state television on Friday. Armed movements who fought for independence for Mali's north but agreed to a peace deal in 2015 say the draft constitution does not take into account the provisions of the peace agreement. Mali has been ruled by the military junta since 2020 coup against an elected President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. It has faced destabilizing attacks by armed extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group since 2013. In 2021, France and its European partners engaged in the fight against extremists in Mali's north withdrew from the country after the junta brought in mercenaries from Russia's Wagner Group. Mali's vast size and skeletal road network makes staging a referendum very challenging even without the insurgencies in the north. And a successful African free trade area implementation could unlock major benefits for Africa in terms of income, jobs, among other things, a report by IMF staff now says. The departmental paper published on Friday, May 5th, examined the prospects for African trade integration in the context of a changing world amid the climate crisis, risks of geopolitical fragmentation, technological progress, and the continent's prospective demographic growth. The 64-page document found that comprehensive reforms combined with AfCFTA implementation could increase the median merchandise trade flow between African countries by 53% and with the rest of the world by 15%. This would subsequently raise the real per capita GDP of the median African country by over 10%. Such performance resonates with findings in the literature that trade reforms could help reduce extreme poverty by the additional 30 to 50 million people across the continent. This result resonates the authors of the report said these opportunities would require investment in physical and human capital, macroeconomic and business environment conducive to private sector-led growth and the modernized social safety net that supports the most vulnerable. The AfCFTA agreement entered into force in 2019 but is not yet effectively implemented. We head over to Nigeria, and police in the country say they have rescued 58 people who had been abducted and held hostage by criminals in central Kogi state. It was not clear how long they had been held. A police spokesperson said the rescue was a joint operation in Udulu forest, which was carried out with local volunteer defense groups. The officials said that the kidnapping gangs escaped with injuries and one of the hostages died during the operation. The incoming President Bola Tinubu, who is due to be sworn in later this month, faces several serious security challenges, including kidnappings for ransom. They became common across the several states during Muhammadu Buhari's time in office. And then still staying in Nigeria, I think one of the stories that I read is when I was looking at Nigeria's, some of the papers from there, multiple flights have been cancelled at Nigeria's Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in the capital Abuja after a plane crash-landed, disabling the runway. The Max Air 737-400 flight experienced tire burst on Sunday as it landed in Abuja from Yola in northeastern Adamawa State. The management of Max Air said that all the 143 passengers, an infant and 6 crew members on board were safely evacuated with no casualties. The incident has triggered many flight cancellations and delays across the country. According to local media, authorities said the aircraft had been removed on Sunday evening and the runway was being inspected and swept for reopening. Many passengers are reportedly still stranded at the airport. And then we end our news from Cameroon. And gunmen shot dead a journalist late on Sunday in Bamenda, a city in Cameroon's troubled northwest region, the local journalist union said. At least the third killing of a media worker in the country this year. Anyende No, the West and Northwestern Region Bureau Chief of weekly newspaper The Advocate, was in a pub in Bamenda's Nkariko neighborhood when unidentified assailants opened fire on him, said a colleague of his, Melanie Drefo, who was close to the scene of the attack. Earlier this year, radio presenter and journalist was killed in two separate attacks in or near the capital Yaoundé, prompting the United Nations to express concern about the media environment. The Cameroon Association of English-Speaking Journalists confirmed Nso's death and called for an investigation. A spokesperson for the regional authority said they were not aware of the attack. There has been no claim of responsibility so far. Nso's death came amid a conflict between Cameroonian authorities and some separatist factions in English-speaking regions that turned violent in 2017. Thousands of people have been killed in the fighting between the armed separatists and the government troops, with atrocities committed on both sides. 10:30 a.m. You are now up to date, and that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. I know, being a Monday, we had so much to bring you up to date with, and especially some of the developing stories like that of Sudan. The situation hasn't gotten any better. I think, like I started by the news that I started with, a lot of Sudanese are now fleeing into Ethiopia. A good number of them are fleeing into Ethiopia, crossing into Ethiopia, and others, of course, the foreigners. I think majority of them have been able to evacuate their citizens from Sudan. So Sudanese have been left with themselves, and so the situation has really not improved. And I think there's not been a commitment to even honoring the truces that several. I've lost count. I think this one was maybe number 5 or I'm not sure. I've lost count because they keep having these truces and agreements, and then few hours later, both sides, they keep violating these truths. So there's no, I don't know if there's any reason for them to even have these truths. But that is what Egypt, together with other Arab League countries, have been having a conversation about over the weekend. This is the third meeting from April, and they're trying to find a solution. And one of the things that they were discussing, let me get us that. Yeah, the Arab League, they were meeting over the weekend in Cairo, and I think one of the things that they were looking to do is to convince these two sides of the generals on how they can arrive at a successful truce, and how they can respect the ceasefire. And that has not been very successful so far. So that is what they are meeting to discuss about, and it is interesting. Both sides are not really showing any commitment, like I've said, to respecting this peace deal. And Saudi Arabia, of course, and the U.S. have been trying on one side, and Egypt and other Arab League, member states have also been trying, and we know also there have been efforts from IGAD, but that has not gone very far because of the situation in Sudan, and that is being led by South Sudanese President Salva Kiir, Kenyan President William Ruto, together with Djibouti's President Goulier. So that has not really taken off because of some certain factors, and of course these heads of states cannot go to Sudan. It's not safe for them to go there, and the last I was talking to us about this, they were yet to agree on a venue, and I was just wondering, do we need to take another 1 week or 2 weeks to decide on a venue? But I think the more we have all these actors and different mediation processes on the sides of all of these people trying to solve this problem, I don't think we are going to find a solution to this problem. You're having Egypt and the Arab League on one side, trying to negotiate and talk to these generals to agree on a ceasefire. You're having IGAD President Kiir, President Ruto, the president of Djibouti on one side. They're also trying to do the same thing. And then you're having Saudi Arabia, the US on the other end, and they're also trying to do the same thing. And then maybe others that are not open to coming to the table and talking. The problem with all these people and all these actors, especially, I'm very wary of the external actors. The minute you bring in the Arab League, and I know it's important because Sudan is in the Arab League, so I would understand why they would have interest in wanting to help in the mediation process. And for Egypt and for Saudi Arabia, I think Sudan has had some level of diplomatic relations with all these actors. But the minute you bring all these people, and they're all having all these fractions on the sides trying to solve this one problem, that you will never get to the end of this issue. You'll never have this problem solved, because all these actors have in mind are not just here to help in solving the problem in Sudan. Maybe for IGAD, because I think for us, when Sudan is at peace, it's best for this region. Okay, it is best for this region, and it is in the best interest of for us all that Sudan is stable and Sudan is able to transit, and Sudan is just, stability in Sudan is important for this region. Because from the stories and from the news that we have been getting, and some of the factors that could have led to this stalemate and where we are today in Sudan, I don't hear so many of the countries from this greater eastern region of Africa being mentioned. I don't hear that, but you will hear names of actors like Egypt, actors like from the Middle East and all that perhaps have some vested interest in Sudan, and so having them being part of a mediation process, be guaranteed that they will be advancing their own foreign policy. They will be advancing, and they will be coming from a perspective of their own interest, and so the larger peace and a more stable and I think a more long-lasting peace. That is perhaps not something they might be having, as one of the key driving factors for their interest. And I could be wrong on that. But this process should have been left, as President Isaias Afwerki said over a week ago, a region president. He said this process should be left for at least the IGAD. And I think he brought in African Union. But IGAD, he said, because IGAD already had came in quickly. Of course, it was not quick enough. I think I criticized IGAD until this war broke up, because we could see the cracks. We could see the possibilities of an all-drawn war coming up. We could see that Sudan was walking on very tight ropes, and there was a possibility that these generals will plunge this country into chaos. And my plea at that time was that IGAD perhaps could have been a bit more, they would have taken steps quickly to de-escalate the situation during that time before what is happening now happened. But, with as much as, IGAD made a few statements and all that. But sometimes also, if the players and these actors are not willing to listen and to respect some of these things, maybe it becomes a bit hard. But I think IGAD should have done enough to push for a de-escalation before what we are seeing now played out. And so they were a bit reluctant. They were not quick enough, and they took their time, and now we have a conflict and a possible civil war that now we have to deal with, and they have to find a solution, which is more expensive. I think if they would have led a proper mediation, they saw the early warnings. The African Union has a department on its peace and security architecture that looks at the early warnings of situations across Africa, early warnings on conflict, and they can see the trend, and they can see, the statements, and they can look at the actions that are coming up and what is happening. And the essence and the reason why they do have this in the African Union security architecture is to enable them to handle situations early enough before they escalate to magnitudes that we are now seeing. So I don't know what that department was doing, the early warning. I don't know what they were doing. You cannot wait until now we have a war and you're now coming out issuing statements and all these things, and now you look like you're doing something. Musa Faki, you have been watching and seeing what has been happening in Sudan. And I know Sudan has been removed from the African Union because of the military leadership in the country, so it cannot be allowed to be part of the African Union. But still, whatever happens in Sudan affects all of us, and I think still it is a responsibility of the African Union. Matter of fact, you're talking now, so you should have done something early enough through your early warning department in your security and peace architecture, in the African Union, but you failed to do that. IGAD failed to do that, and so they wait until now we have a fully blown war, and there's they're trying to salvage, I don't know what it is, but they're trying to salvage around now, have heads of states meet and this and that, and IGAD's part, they're taking so long. I mean, close to four weeks now we're headed there. And what is happening? What is really happening, IGAD? Surely you're supposed to have, I think, agreed on a venue where these mediation talks are supposed to be taking place. But on the other side, these other actors, Egypt and the Arab League and the US and Saudi Arabia, there's a possibility that they may not be for having IGAD lead these talks, because these are countries that have immense interest in Sudan. So if they can be in control of these talks, I think that will work well for them. And I think that is what they're going for. That is why you're seeing this intensified mediation. I mean, Arab League has met in Egypt 4 times since this war broke out on the 15th of April. So that tells you the importance of Sudan for that union. Remember, as I keep reminding us here, even when Israel and Palestine, when the war intensified, the declarations that were made by the Arab League nations against Israel, the 3 no's: no to recognizing Israel as a state, no to having any diplomatic relations, no to another thing against Israel. Those were made in Sudan. So Sudan is a very paramount member of the Arab League. I would understand why this would be in their interest to come and help in mediating this process. However, there are also other factors outside of just Sudan being a member. There are also other factors and other interest on member states, a few member states in that Arab League, that they have this vested interest in Sudan. So the only safe mediators that we could possibly have for this conflict is the one for the IGAD leaders. The one by President William Ruto from Kenya and Djibouti president, and President Salva Kiir. President Salva Kiir has been leading the mediation team efforts for Sudan previously, before this war broke out. There was some remnants of some rebel groups still in Darfur and other areas who were fighting, and the government. So South Sudan had been leading those mediations. So South Sudan sort of understands the architecture of some of these issues across Sudan. So that's why I think even IGAD chose to pick President Salva Kiir to help in leading these mediation efforts on behalf of IGAD, because he understands the history and some of the nitty-gritties as far as the security situation in Sudan is concerned. So I'll still vouch to have IGAD be supported in leading this mediation team. So why can't Egypt and Arab League support the efforts of IGAD? Why can't the US and Saudi Arabia support the efforts of IGAD? Why do we have to have all these fractions? As long as we keep having all these actors and this foreign interference in the name of trying to set up a mediation process, we will not see the end of this war. And I will keep citing Ethiopia and the conflict that had taken place for 2 years. And the reason we got a quick resolution when all members decided to really participate actively in this mediation, the reason why we got a quick resolution is because we did not have in that process other external factors, other external players or actors or negotiators, US, EU, whatever it is. We did not have that interference. It was led by African Union, President Uhuru Kenyatta, former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, among other African eminent people, were part of this process, and they led this process, and it was acceptable in the African context. because our only interest is to find a solution in this continent. So if you have other players, be wary. And as long as they keep insisting on wanting to be part of this mediation process, and they're coming up and coming in with their interest and what they feel and how they feel this perhaps mediation process should go. And there's also a possibility that they could even be supporting one of these warring sides. There has been those allegations in a few countries that also now wants to be involved in this mediation. So that is already a risky affair. And when you understand anything about mediation, then I think the players and the actors who even are leading this mediation, I think they should be beyond reproach. Like Caesar's wife, they should be beyond reproach. They should not be seen to be biased. They should not be seen to have a proclivity towards one side of the warring actors. And the place should be neutral. So I don't know, of all these countries we have in this continent, surely, like I was saying last time, we can find one that can host the mediation processes. I don't think Egypt will be the right venue because of certain allegations that have been made and the level of interest Egypt has, I think, in Sudan and the previous history they have together. I don't think Egypt will be the right space, and I could be wrong for this. And also, I'd like to see others just stay away and let IGAD-led process be supported by African Union. Be supported. If these actors want to really help in this process, let them support these efforts that are being led by IGAD. And let them stay off of it. Let them not be directly involved, because too many voices and too many interests and too many actors, this will mess up everything, and the situation is already very delicate. So you don't want to have these proxy wars now coming in and starting, because that is what will happen, honestly. We'll have all their interest coming here and starting to conflict, and we'll see another tug of war and proxy wars and push and pull, and we will never see the end of this war. So many people have already died already. A lot of Sudanese have already been affected. So what we want is a quick solution, especially that can convince these warring military men to stop with the fighting and to allow for a humanitarian corridor and to allow for easy access of humanitarian aid to the desperate Sudanese who needs this. So that is what we need right now. But the multiple ceasefire that has been declared before, all of that has been rendered useless because they don't even respect that. Both sides violate the ceasefires that have been there. I said I've lost count. I've lost count of how many ceasefires we've heard that. And so I'm not for Saudi Arabia being involved. I'm not for that. I'm not for the US being involved. Egypt is in Africa, but also I'm wary about Egypt involvement and bringing in the Arab League. We saw the Arab League when Kenya and Somalia had a problem. I think it's still there, the maritime boundary dispute. At that time, it was at the International Court of Justice, and the Arab League was issuing statement about Kenya to respect the territorial boundary of Somalia, yada yada yada, a lot of things. And you're wondering, this is a problem between Kenya and Somalia. Can you let Kenya and Somalia deal with this? This idea of other groupings and other blocs and other foreign entities trying to interfere and trying to have a say in some of these African issues between countries is what causes a lot of conflict. Let these countries deal with their own issues. Arab League, your members are rich. You could perhaps donate money and support that will support the mediation process, that can support the humanitarian aid that the people of Sudan needs. You can come in that way, but your involvement, I don't think will help in solving anything, because what I see are your interest being now driven and might take center stage in this mediation, and that will defeat the mediation process. That will defeat the whole essence of this, and not just you, but other countries like the US and other countries like Saudi Arabia, which I think is a member of the Arab League. But we need these actors to stay away. That's all I'm trying to say, these many words. We need these external actors to stay away from the mediation process, and anybody who feels driven to want to be involved, let them support the efforts by IGAD leaders, that process by IGAD leaders, because I've not seen the African Union. If the African Union had initiated one, then we would support that. But IGAD has already, is meant, well, they've not even started. So IGAD is also, I don't know what's going on with IGAD, but we need every other actors, including the African Union, now then, since they don't have their own process, to support the efforts by IGAD, and we see how that process will work out. And we lock all the rest of the voices out of it. That is how you're going to get into a quick resolution like that we got from the Ethiopian conflict, okay? And so there you go. So over 700 people now have died, and close to 5,000 or over now probably have been wounded, and of course thousands of others have left their homes in seeking refuge, and a lot of them have accessed Ethiopia and Chad and other countries. So it's very sad. It's really sad. And also another sad news, there has been heavy rains. Last week it was Rwanda, so many deaths that we reported, and now it is the DRC, rains that and floods and landslides in the eastern, it's just the eastern part. What is it with the eastern part of the DRC? We have all these rebel groups. We have this terrorist group, ADF, that is also causing a lot of mayhem. And now we having floods and landslides in the same area that has claimed 203 people. That is according to a report, an official report on Saturday. So there's a possibility even the numbers have gone up. So also that is something that was happening there and happened there. And also the destruction continues as well in Rwanda. Heavy rains are pounding that part of Africa. So our condolences to those who have lost their loved ones and those who have been hurt and are trying to seek for medical appeal. Hopefully they can get the help that they need there. Okay, so we've not talked about Mali now for a while. So apparently the military junta has finally announced that there will be a referendum on whether to update the constitution on June the 18th or not. It is supposed to move the vast country towards civilian rule after a military junta seized power in 2020. Maiga, I think that is his name. And the referendum, in which voters can choose to either accept or reject a draft already contested by political opponents, was due to have taken place in March but was postponed. And the draft would considerably strengthen the power of the president. So it's like it's going to vest more power to the presidency of Mali, something that the opposition and other interest groups have raised concern about. In it, the head of state, rather than the government, determines the policy of the nation. The head of the state cannot determine the policy of the nation. One person. I understand. I do understand that an individual head of state, of course, how they think and how they look at certain issues have a lot to play and finds itself in the foreign policy of a country. But we can't give that huge responsibility to one person to determine the policies of the nation. That is a very serious power that you're vesting in one office. And we know how African presidents are. They act like mini demigods. Not many of them, would have these powers and not do something ridiculous with them. And so that is what they're suggesting, and that is why this was met with a lot of resistance from the opposition and even Malians themselves. So the head of state will determine the policy of the nation, appoints the prime minister and ministers, and has the right to terminate their functions according to the proposal. So that is what we used to have here with former President Moi, who ruled this country for 24 years. And Moi could fire and hire at will. You will be a minister driving through some highway. If you tuned in to 1 o'clock news, the next thing you know, you have been fired, so you have to pull over, because somebody will come and get your car and the flag and all that. So he could hire and fire at will, and those so because of that, you realize that um, the people who were working under him were really at his mercy, and they could not perform in terms of their public service because they were at the mercy of the president. I do understand even right now, the president has the right to appoint and all that, but it goes through a process. What we have right now is if there's a proposal of some of the people that the president is proposing to give certain ministries or certain positions in public service, they have to go through a parliamentary process for vetting and all that, for background check, and just to make sure, parliament to make sure that these people are fit for the job description. That is how it's supposed to be. But in reality, that process has become just for formality in this government and even in the first government, to be honest with you. And so whatever the whatever the constitution, the new constitution which we had promulgated in 2010 had in mind, is not 100%, implemented like that. So, but at least even with the formality, we have checks and balances, and we've seen some of these candidates going through parliament and, issues being raised and their credibility being questioned. And we've seen in a few instances, perhaps the president having second, thought about appointing these people, after that process. So anyway, I'll just give it a benefit of a doubt. It's a work in progress. So maybe one day we will get there, but that is what is supposed to be happening. And so, but before that, our president used to have powers like what is now being proposed here in this new constitution in Mali. Remember the conditions by which this constitution making was even done. I'm even surprised that they imagine that they have finished. Was not robust, was not involving of people, was the military was really, just there overseeing the whole process. So if the military is overseeing a process, where in the world do you think you will have a space to speak your mind and to voice your displeasures in whatever proposals are being made in this constitution? You're not going to argue with the military. You can be short, you can be short or whatever. You can disappear. You don't argue with the military. So it is the military that is in charge in Mali. So in essence, that already did not provide for a conducive environment where a constitutional making process can really be done in a way that it should be done. Because the army was overseeing and very strong-handed upon the whole process. So no wonder they're coming up with such things that they feel should be included in that constitution. So they're saying the president will be the head of state rather than the government, and he will determine the policy of the nation. He will appoint the prime minister and other ministers and has the right to terminate their functions according to the proposals. That is very, very dangerous. So anybody that will be serving at the mercy of the president, and there are no checks and balances that can really put a safeguard and check the powers of this president. Because if you just leave it like that, then you're giving somebody free reins to do whatever. And I think that is a very dangerous thing, especially for a country that is still working towards having a more stable democracy, okay? And the armed movements who fought for independence for Mali's north but agreed to a peace deal in 2015 say the draft constitution does not take into account the provisions of the peace agreement. So that is already a problem. And I think, was it last week I was telling you that some of them have decided to perhaps go back and start fighting again the government, because they feel whatever it is that they had agreed upon when they decided to put down their arms and work with the government, part of those important aspects of that peace agreement was not factored in this proposal, and so that is already a problem. Somalia, as we know, is being ruled by a military junta since 2020 coup that removed President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, who later died last year in January. I think he was under treatment, and and it has faced destabilizing attacks in its north and armed extremist groups that are linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group since 2013. We've seen a country like France and other European partners who were helping Mali in fighting and trying to contain these extremist activities withdrew from the country. Mali fell out with France, and so that meant that other countries were also started leaving, like Germany and others. Its European Union partners started moving out of the country, and especially after it's inviting the Wagner mercenary group from Russia. So that is that. So anyway, I feel this AFCFTA, this is a conversation that I can't have right now and conclude, because I think it's very important. If this free trade area implementation that was agreed upon in 2019 but has not yet effectively been implemented, I have some suspicion there's a possibility some external forces are really fighting and are really having private talks with different African countries to derail the implementation of this. Because there have been several reports, and the one that I just read was just earlier now, that shows, according to research, should Africa fully implement this Africa Free Trade Area, this will boost the growth of the different economies in this continent. You know, African countries, there will be a trade flow within these countries, and that will boost our economies by 53% and the rest of the world by 15%. So we stand to gain. And the reason why we have been slow in implementing this, I don't understand. I don't know why it is so hard for us to work within the modalities and see how we can work to have this. But I do have some suspicion that there are other factors that are working in derailing this, because this will be a game changer as far as trade and building strong economies in this continent. So it is too much of an important conversation that is quite wide, and because of the interest of time, I will not get into it right now, but I'll do a proper research. Then we'll just have a complete show so that we can look at this AFCFTA and look at it and see what is it in store for us as a continent, if we can be able to implement it and realize it. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. This has been African Touch. My name is Miriam. Go to enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.